Hi, my name is Gary Tresmann, and I'm here to talk about family court law and my experiences within it and the inequities I've suffered through it, being a man, basically, in family court. I was just reading the newspaper today, USA Today, April 30th, 2012, and I was just looking at this article here, wondering whether police have made a connection between domestic violence and the economy going down. And it occurs to me that although there may be a correlation, it certainly is not the main cause of domestic violence. But I would say that the majority of family violence or domestic violence in America today is caused by our legal system. Generally speaking, when people who are expecting equity and justice from family courts are subjected to inequity and injustice, and they have no place to go, the average person might just feel a little bit frustrated. I mean, to take an example, specifically, in our family court jurisprudence today, all a spouse, usually a woman, has to do is go to a family court, make some vague claim of being afraid, without even allegations of violence or threats of violence, and get an order, an absolute judicial order with all the power of law behind it, which will get her husband thrown out of his own home, inability to talk or see his children for months on end, access often to his own finances cut short, all upon her word alone. One day, I came home and I wanted to see my child, and the door was locked, and all I heard was, "Daddy, I love you." And I heard from my ex, "Don't knock at my door, you're harassing us, go away." And when I tried to find out what was happening, what was going on, I found out that she had filed a petition for custody against me for my child. I was stripped of all parental rights, essentially, and I could not see her. I could not be with my daughter for 2 months from that point on. Every day we were together. We would go out, we would go swimming, we'd see movies, we'd just have normal daily life with each other. From one day to the next, I could not see my daughter at all. I was, by law, prevented from seeing my daughter whatsoever. One time when I did get some unsupervised visits with my daughter, still nothing close to what I used to have. My daughter confided with me, "Daddy, Mommy's giving me a pill every day and it's making me feel funny. And I don't know what it is. I'm not supposed to tell you about it. But she's giving it to me. I've got weird dreams. I can't sleep." And I had noticed also that she was gaining weight at an extremely fast rate. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to call her mother, because if I did, I'd be charged with harassment again, which I had been charged with before just by being in my own kitchen. Well, I tried to find out what the medicine was, but in short order, essentially looking it up on the internet or trying to find out what it was, asking my daughter what it looked like, what colors were in the pill, I got charged with child neglect. Now, for this whole question of neglect, where I'm trying to find out what drugs are being given to my daughter without telling me, her father, I have gone through at least 9 hearings, no less than 2 hours each, bringing in psychologists, bringing in at least 6 different witnesses in my favor, all of them saying essentially that there was no neglect, and they didn't see any neglect. And a huge amount of money being spent at taxpayers' expense on this question as to whether I neglected my child by trying to find out what drugs were being given to her by her mother without letting me know. So what I've been going through now for the past 6 months is proceedings against me where CPS and family court are alleging that I neglected my child by letting her have unsweetened soda, by giving her chicken McNuggets, by weighing her and measuring her height, by wondering and trying to find out what kind of medication and drugs her mother had been giving her without telling me. And for the past 6 or so months, I have not been able to see my daughter for more than 1 hour a week, chaperoned in an office. And it's very frustrating for me and very sad emotionally for my daughter, not being able to be with her father. And hopefully this will be resolved in about 20 days, because they chop up these proceedings into one of, am I a risk, and two, did I do something wrong actually or not. So I'm pending right now in 20 days as to find out whether they determine this or not, whether giving soda to my child or weighing her is actually some form of abuse. And that's where I sit today. I would say that the number of false claims in such ex parte proceedings is very high, on the order of 85, 90%, maybe even higher. The reason being is that when a person who comes before the court, usually the mother or the wife, and lies, just straight up lies to get what they want, that the ramifications for those lies are minimal or non-existent. Very rarely are any persons prosecuted for perjury in family court. It's almost expected that, well, that's what they're going to do, what do you want from us? And that right there encourages anybody who comes there first, essentially, to lie. Well, this is all possible, apparently. They've perverted the justice system in the context of family law by taking the concept of an ex parte proceeding, which is essentially a proceeding where one litigant comes to the judge and says, hey, I need an order. An order that is backed up by the power of the law and the police is issued on one person's say-so. And this is so different than just about any expectation of normal jurisprudence in our normal court system. Perjury in family court scenarios is like not even considered much of an issue. Generally speaking, whenever there are important rights at hand, basically property or children or anything, money, what happens is that you usually have the opportunity to defend yourself, or to at least participate in the order that's going to disconnect you from those things before it happens. But in family court today, what happens is the usual routine is one person, usually the wife, mother, comes into court, makes a vague claim of being afraid, or I don't want my husband to see our children, without any real allegations or true ones. And then what will happen is the court will say, okay, that's fine with me, and then sign an order saying this man is prevented from going to his own home, and is prevented from seeing his own children, and prevented possibly even from accessing his own bank account. It's just unconscionable, unethical, and just un-American. Well, the whole idea of domestic violence laws and prohibitions was based upon the idea that that one spouse would be literally physically assaulting the other. Usually in public policy that translated to the man or the husband assaulting the wife. However, even now we know, statistically speaking, that women are responsible for about 46% of all domestic violence assaults. But that notwithstanding, originally it being true violence, domestic violence as it actually is pronounced, now what they've done is they've somehow converted and translated domestic violence to mean just about anything that makes a woman feel uncomfortable. Being shouted at now is considered domestic violence. Sometimes it'll be considered domestic violence if she just feels like she's afraid. No violence actually has had to occur. And that being subsumed into common family court jurisprudence today becomes the justification for these ex parte orders and restraining orders that literally have no justification whatsoever and might be based upon just law. Now, another injustice that is usually perpetrated in family court. And I hate to use it in sexist terms, but that's how it generally occurs. Usually the mother and the wife go to family court to get a petition, say, to get custody of the children. Now, theoretically, custody isn't just granted without a trial. However, what happens is, upon these ex parte orders, basically one person comes in, usually the mother, comes into the court and says, I want the kids forever. And the court says, well, you can't have them forever, but you can have them now. Based on an ex parte order, the father has no say in the matter. The mother is then granted what they call temporary custody, but full, total, and sole custody, temporary. The temporary is very rarely temporary because it starts out at no less than 10 months and then could go on for years. And by the time trial comes about, it becomes an issue as where the children actually would be supposedly better to stay. Would they be better to stay with the person they have been living with for the past year or more? Or would they be better to go living with the father who they've not possibly been seeing for more than a couple hours a week? So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Supposedly these temporary orders, I would say, almost intentionally subsume the children into full custody for the mother, as it becomes an issue. They've been with the mother for that long, and why shouldn't they continue being with the mother? And to add insult upon injury, during this temporary time, and in fact when permanent custody is actually put into place, there is the whole issue of child support. Theoretically, child support is supposed to be equally shared by both parents. However, they presume that the custodial parent is simply giving whatever money they have to the child, so they make no calculations as to how much that parent has to put aside for the child. What they do, however, is the non-custodial parent, usually the father, they make an assessment of his income, and then they make an arbitrary statement of 17% or more for the child of his income. That man has to pay the mother, not even the child in escrow, but directly to the mother for the child support. Whether it actually costs that much or not is totally irrelevant to the calculation and totally irrelevant to the judgment. Once they determine what your income is, you are then obligated, under penalty of imprisonment, to pay 17% of your income to the mother of your child without any accounting, without any proof that the money that you have spent towards the child actually reaches the child and is paid for the child's upbringing and upkeep. Now, then you would think that child support is a good idea, and probably it is. It is a good idea. A parent who gets a child certainly should have some obligation to raising that child and paying for whatever it costs to raise the child. However, the way it's been perverted in our jurisprudence, our family court jurisprudence today, is it's not just a good idea, it's the law. And it's a law that's backed up by imprisonment, fines and imprisonment and forfeitures. A father who doesn't pay his child support is not considered guilty of a civil offense, effectively. He's effectively convicted of a criminal offense. Debtor's prison was outlawed hundreds of years ago, and yet here we have debtor's prison occurring every day, with fathers being imprisoned for not paying child support. One of the main reasons, one of the incentives that the system has for enforcing and extorting as much child support as possible is that the system gets a cut out of the amounts of child support a father is forced to pay. Something called Title IV-D funding, which is something that comes down from the federal government and is proportionate to how much they manage to force one parent to pay for the child, usually the father. It's a sick and self-serving system where the more money they can extort under penalty of imprisonment, the more money they make. A great incentive to do both. When a man finds himself unable to pay child support, not only do they do all those things, but they also can take away his driver's license his professional occupation licenses, such as his legal license, his medical license, contracting license, any number of licenses that are required by a person to practice his business in a state and to make money in order to make child support payments. Lacking that, how is a person supposed to make the child support payments when they start stripping him of every capability to do so? So, a man is required to spend 17% of his income by law, and once again under threat of imprisonment, which this happens all the time. Men are imprisoned for not coming up with money. Not because they did anything violent, not because they broke the law per se, but because they didn't pay the mother of their children the 17% of their income. Now, 17% is the low end of what is required. If there's 2 children or more, it certainly goes way beyond 17%. That's only if there's 1 child. And once again, there are no accountings. There is no requirement for the woman who's receiving these child support payments to ever prove what she did or didn't do with the money. There is a complete lack of requirement, lack of any information as to what happened to the money, even though it's called child support. In effect, it's not child support at all. It is spousal support or ex-spousal support. There's just no proof or requirement by law to know what happened to the money after it was sent. Now, when we're talking 17%, 25% or more as base child support, we're not including other court-ordered mandates, again, which the father can go to jail for by not providing. We're talking about summer camp, we're talking about medical, we're talking about daycare. All these things are on top of this base amount of 17%, 25% or more of the father's income. And of course, we're talking about domestic violence and the correlation between that and the economy. Well, what about the personal economy of a father who may be totally financially decimated by these court orders that demand significant portions of his income, his disposable income, that he has to put towards rent, that he has to put towards food, basic necessities that he cannot afford. Being put between a rock and a hard place, some men will simply snap. Often a father is expected to go to anger management classes. Very often, also, the father's not particularly having a problem with anger, except the frustration that the circumstance and situation has put him under. It's not pathological anger or frustration that he's feeling, rather legitimate situational frustration. If he didn't feel frustration under those circumstances, then you might wonder how sane he is and how he's able to handle reality. A little bit of frustration given the circumstance and a little bit of anger given the circumstance is not sick, it's not wrong. It is just a normal reaction to being completely cut out of any sense of power or any sense of being with one's child and being eviscerated of all one's money, essentially, and involvement. Some people, in fact, there was a fellow named Thomas Bell who immolated himself in front of the family court by dousing himself with gasoline and setting himself on fire with a suicide note basically saying, I was forced to do this by the family court. I didn't have enough money and they were going to send me to jail. I was just reading the newspaper today, USA Today, April 30th, 2012, and I was just looking at this article here, wondering whether police have made a connection between domestic violence and the economy going down. And it occurs to me that although there may be a correlation, it certainly is not the main cause of domestic violence. I think domestic violence is probably engendered and made much worse by the family court system, which frustrates both spouses, both people who come to there, and force them into such frustration that they have nowhere to turn, no one to complain to, and many people just lose it. There is very little incentive for all the experts and all the professionals involved in family court law to want to actually resolve issues between the parents and the children. In fact, it behooves them and makes them richer for these conflicts to exist. It makes them richer to perpetuate these conflicts. All the attorneys, all the psychologists, all the CPS workers, all the court actors, they all make money when there's a conflict and a controversy of custody in a child custody case. In such circumstances where there is a whole industry essentially devoted to dealing with conflict between parents and the child, the institutions and the professionals in those societies, whether they know it or not, begin to want to create conflict when there may not have been conflict before. Or they want to perpetuate conflict where conflict appears to be resolving itself. Basically, the whole system makes money when there is a conflict between parents and when a parent, as such as a father, can be separated from the child.